And my first pleasure of this webinar is to turn it over to my colleague Elizabeth Mancehart, who is the chair of the Career Development Committee.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you for all your help in organizing this. And welcome, everyone. I am really excited for today's discussion. Let me just give you a quick overview of the CCD and let you know of a couple of upcoming events, and then we'll get right into it. So the CCD, we host different types of events throughout ASA and to the broader statistical community. We do have several events at the joint statistical meetings, along with webinars and office hours that we've always offered virtually, and that has been the case with everything the last couple of years. We are very excited a little later in 2022 that we will be launching some career development podcasts, so stay tuned for that. Our Vice Chair, Christina Nurse, is working on getting that set up. We partner with other organizations within ASA and again across the broader community to provide resources for the community of statisticians and data scientists, such as today's event. And that includes other resources as well for professional development and mentoring. So please see our webpage for those additional resources. And so just a quick look at who is on the committee. Myself, I mentioned the Vice Chair, Christina Nurse. Donna is our amazing ASA liaison. And we have several other people that are very actively involved and really excited to bring you the events of 2022. So one of the initiatives that we launched last year was the Portfolio Technology Adoptions Initiative. And we wanted to let you know that it's discreetly been launched behind the scenes. So you can go to the CCD website and find information on that, and stay tuned. A little later in the spring, we'll likely host a webinar introducing those concepts and kicking that off and kind of giving some live demos, et cetera, on how to update your own technology portfolio, which is definitely a webinar that I myself need to attend. And last but certainly not least, one of our kind of flagship, really capstone events is the guided networking event that we run every year at JSM. We give a quick thanks to Claire McKay-Bowen, who kicked that off several years ago, and it has just been a great success. It's an opportunity for students and early career statisticians to kind of come to this informal networking session and kind of practice meeting and greeting with some a big community of ASA mentors. And a big part of that is our sort of key speakers that we invite to those events to give their tips for networking that they've learned along their career. And we're very excited this year to have Dion Price, who works at the US FDA and is also our ASA president-elect this year. David Morgenstein, who also works with the CCD. We're very excited to have David involved in the CCD. It's a former vice president at Westat and was ASA president in 2015. And then from the academic side, we will have Monsieur Fuentes, and she is currently just started this last year as the president of St. Edward's University. And she has done quite a lot of work with a lot of communities, including ASA, and serves on several advisory boards. So it's a great group of sort of senior professional mentors and a great way to sort of kick off your own JSM experience. And we're seeing how that will work logistically based on whether JSM will be virtual, but please check back to the website for more information on that. And with that, I would like to extend a big welcome and a huge thank you to our speakers for today. And I will let Donna kick off their introductions.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Speaking of an amazing group, we have an amazing group here today, and I'm really excited that they will share their insights with you. And so each person will do about a 10-minute presentation, and after those presentations, we'll have lots of time for question and answer. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And we are going to start with Linda Young. So Linda, if you want to share your screen, I'll give an introduction. Linda is the Chief Mathematical Statistician and Director of Research and Development at the National Agricultural Statistics Service. Her research interests include integrating diverse data, especially that involving spatial data, agricultural data, and statistical ecology. She's just an amazing person, has been so productive. She has 3 books, more than 100 publications, and more than 50 journals, constituting a mix of statistics and subject matter journals. She's been an editor of a journal, has served in a broad range of offices with professional statistical societies, including vice president of the ASA and chair of the Committee of Presidents of Statistical Societies. She's the recipient of the ASA Founders Award, a fellow of the ASA and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, an elected member of the International Statistical Institute. And so with that very brief introduction, I will turn it over to Linda to start us on our distinguished career journey.
Thanks. You can see my slides, right? All right. Thank you for the honor of being here today. I'd like to tell you that I had this grand plan for my career and I executed it flawlessly, but that would not be the truth. As I look back, a couple of factors tended to guide my career decisions. The first was that I looked for opportunities that I thought would be interesting and fun. And the second was my family was a major consideration. Hopefully you'll see how those each impacted my decisions as I describe my path. Between my junior and senior years in high school, I had the opportunity to attend a National Science Foundation summer workshop on probability and Fortran program at the University of Tennessee. I came back convinced I was ready to be a statistician. However, my grandfather was president of West Texas State University at the time, which did not have a statistics degree. So I got a bachelor's and master's in mathematics at West Texas State. Then I went to Oklahoma State to pursue a degree in mathematics, a PhD. And I'll call Oklahoma State OSU. There's a couple of others, but that's mine. When I got to OSU, I was enrolled in abstract algebra, topology, and a third equally esoteric course. And I was not thrilled about those. Were not my areas. That's not what I liked about mathematics. But I was given an office on the 3rd floor with the statistics graduate students and faculty. And as I got to visiting with them, I decided, hey, I don't want to do mathematics. I want to do statistics like I planned a few years ago. And so even before the semester started, I switched degree programs. 2 major events during that first year affected my career path. Now, OSU is the land-grant institution in Oklahoma. As a consequence, extensive agricultural research is conducted at university-owned land throughout the state, and the statistics department has a consulting lab supported to a great extent with agricultural funds. So one day, the faculty member leading that lab asked several of us if we wanted to go to the Oklahoma City Zoo with him and some researchers. The purpose of the trip was to design a study to determine why the golden marmosets in the zoo were getting sick. I was the only one who went. I couldn't believe it. We had so much fun. Those golden marmosets were scattered throughout the zoo, and we visited with everyone who handled them, going and checking out their cages and looking at all kinds of stuff. Well, I came back convinced that that's what I wanted to do, work in the interface between statistics and science. Perhaps largely because of that trip, I was awarded the assistantship to work in that consulting lab about a year later, and that gave me extensive experience with designing and analyzing studies. That trip also led to a major portion of my dissertation being focused on the sequential methods for estimating population totals. The other event also happened pretty much by happenstance. As I was in a statistical inference course, the entomology professor sitting in front of me turned and asked the person behind me whether she wanted a summer job. And she declined. Well, I needed a summer job. So I caught him right after class and told him I wanted the job, and he hired me right there on the spot. That led me to collect and analyze data in the hot cotton fields of Oklahoma. That's where I gained a great appreciation for those who collect good data. And I misspoke. That's really what led to my dissertation topic, not the other. You guys are making me nervous, but I'll keep on. All right. I had our first child when I was a graduate student at Oklahoma State. And then when I graduated, I had a number of opportunities, but given where we were as a family, I decided to take the position on faculty at Oklahoma State. We had a farm. We had a couple other children while I was there. And it was a good decision. The executive director of ASA at the time visited campus, and I asked him how to get more involved with ASA. And he told me, well, pick out a committee or two and volunteer. The professional ethics committee was my first committee, but it didn't meet at all during the year. 3 years I was on the committee. However, shortly thereafter, I was asked to join the ASA review committee of the Environmental Monitoring and Assessment Program, or EMAP. I still don't know why I got that opportunity. The other members on the committee were Noel Cressy, Rod Little, Jim Mattis, and Walter Liggett. All of them were much better known than I was. And I had such a good time and learned so much by working with those individuals. That also provided a foundation for future work with other ASA committees and work in other professional societies. After a few years, I wanted to explore other opportunities, which led to my taking a position in the biometry department at the University of Nebraska, which is another land-grant institution. I helped develop a master's program and did extensive consulting with agricultural researchers, a lot in the cornfields in Nebraska. And then other opportunities began to arise, but by then our oldest was in high school and he was not interested in moving. Now, our children are each 3 years apart. So once the first one entered high school, we had children in high school until the youngest one graduated. One day, George Casella emailed me and told me he wanted to visit with me about exchanging my snowshoes for sunglasses. When we talked, I told George, I can't apply for a position at UF right now because our youngest is getting ready to be a senior in high school. He told me, well, if it works out, we'll wait. It worked out, they waited. Now, at that time, the University of Florida had, the statistics department had 3 different groups. And my responsibility was to lead the group in medicine. It didn't take me long to realize that really wasn't a good fit for me. I didn't enjoy the medical studies as much as agricultural studies. And it was a real struggle. So after a couple of years, I moved over to the agricultural group. And although I continued to lead the group in the med school during a transition process, now, once with that transition, I got to work on all kinds of cool problems from my perspective. Statistical issues relating to manatees, red tide, greening disease, and other things. When I joined UF, so that was a good fit. The good move was, it was good. But when I joined UF, the department was comprised of a number of outstanding statisticians who were also wonderful people. Men like Alan Agresti, George Casella, Malay Ghosh, Ron Randalls, Raymond Littell, and others. It was terrific. If I had a statistical problem I wanted to talk over with someone, I could find someone with expertise that I could talk to. It was great. As several retired or died, the new hires tended to be much more theoretical and not as interested in applications, and the views and orientation of the department began to shift. In 2009, I began working on an agreement with NIST. I had an opportunity to lead a research team that worked on an issue identified by the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, or NASS, and I continued to work with NASS beyond that initial agreement. Working with one of my graduate students and NASS staff, we developed a new method for the analysis of the census of agriculture, which was implemented for the 2012 census. During the summer of 2011, Mark Harris asked me about joining NASS. Well, my husband had passed away in the fall of 2010, and my house had flooded in February of 2011. So I told Mark, I'm not making any major decision for at least a year. That next summer, he came back and said, well, what about now? And we started a discussions, and finally I agreed to be chief statistician of NASS beginning in September 2013. Well, shortly before I was to join, Cynthia Clark, the administrator at the time, came to visit me and asked me to also be director of research and development. I told her, no, thanks. Chief statistician's good. I'm good there. But those of you who know Cynthia know she can be quite persuasive. And I finally agreed to do both. Now, I had never been in government. I did not know how it worked. The research division was in Fairfax, Virginia, which is quite some distance from the rest of the NASS headquarters in DC. And most of the research staff lived near the NASS office, the Fairfax office. Research was not having much of an impact on NASS processes. I became director on October 1, 2013, which was the first day of what is now the third longest federal government shutdown. Shortly after the end of the shutdown, we were told that the division was being moved from Fairfax to the South Building, which is just off the National Mall. The staff were not happy. Talking about a way not to get a good start on a job. That's it. It's not a good start, was not a good start. We lost about a third of the staff. However, we were able to make good hires, which quickly strengthened the division's research capacity. This transition was challenging for everyone, for the staff, for me, and I think to some extent the agency. However, I am extremely pleased with where we are today. Research emanating from the division is being moved into the production process at a steady pace. Why did I move from academia to government? Statisticians do not often have an opportunity to have national impact, but at NASS, those opportunities are abundant. The statistical issues to be addressed are interesting, diverse, and critical to the success of NASS. Research is not put on a shelf to gather dust. It is generally used as soon as it has been shown to be better than existing processes. And others are asking for more research to be completed. So while I have found the work challenging, it has and continues to be extremely fun and rewarding. So as you can see, the biggest driving force in my career was, am I having fun yet? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Linda. That was wonderful. We really appreciate it. And we will come back after the next two presentations with questions. So I want to encourage folks to either use the chat or the Q&A. So it is absolutely my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, John Baylor. John is University Distinguished Professor and Chair of the Department of Statistics at Miami University in Ohio. He is the founding chair of the Department of Statistics at Miami. His research interests include quantitative risk estimation, the design and analysis of environmental toxicology, and occupational health studies in gerontological data analysis. He has published 150 plus peer-reviewed papers, many with student co-authors, 4 books, and 40 plus other publications. He served on numerous committees and in fact just recently concluded his term as president of ISI and is currently on the ISI executive committee. He was on the ASA board, and he is I think one of his greatest contributions to the field is that he is a co-host of Stats and Stories, a most wonderful podcast that brings quantitative literacy to the general public. And so with that, I will turn it over to John to share his distinguished career journey.
Thanks, Donna. You are a silver-tongued devil, aren't you? Thanks for the kind words. It's a pleasure to be here, also with great colleagues. I just wanted to start and just clarify, some people aren't quite sure what the heck Miami University is about. So just to give you an idea, the little red pin here is where Oxford, Ohio, and Miami University is. Miami, Florida is here. So just to make sure you kind of appreciate that in the current context of winter, this is what the University of Miami in Florida looks like, and this is what Miami University in Oxford, Ohio might look like. So it's a little different experience. We're a state institution, a public institution, the 10th oldest public school in the US, about 20,000 students. So what I'm going to do in terms of my remarks is I'll give you a little bit of background and career path. I'm going to talk some about considerations and decisions, some maybe close with some personal aspects, and I'll try to pepper the talk with with some tips and advice, a little seasoning throughout. I just first begin with a thanks. Thanks to one of my faculty colleagues is on this particular ASA committee and suggested that I could participate, and I'm honored and delighted to be able to share some time and some perspective and a retrospective for me in terms of looking back on things that I've done and what I thought about when doing so. Just a little bit of background. There's the undergraduate path. I was pre-med when I started, and then when undecided, really liked math and statistics, and did that in psychology because I wanted to think about the application of statistics in a problem area. I had done summer work that involved working for a statistical consulting component of a Procter & Gamble division, and then a home performance testing group, which was doing some market research for things that they were doing. And so I thought at the time I was going to do quantitative psychology, market research, and industry, but found out that I was much more interested in the application of statistical tools and techniques and developing methods for biostatistical properties, particularly environmental kinds of questions. The picture there was with my mom and grandparents. It was the only time my grandmother ever flew on a plane, was to come and join to see her grandkid get a doctorate, which was pretty cool. I was blessed to be able to do a postdoc within the federal government at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is in Research Triangle Park. But after that, I had an opportunity to return to academia, and actually I was returning to my alma mater, and so where I had done my undergraduate study. So just some key considerations and decisions. I'll give you lots of nevers. When I was in high school, I swore I would never go to Miami University. It was too close to where I had gone to high school. As an undergraduate, I was going to work in industry. I was never going to teach. My mom had been a teacher and I said I'd never do that. Although I was open to the idea of statistics. I really liked statistical consulting and I had a great experience working in it. I thought I would do that. After my graduate study, I ended up spending time in a government research facility, and I loved the environment. I really enjoyed the work. So what did I do after all of these nevers and things that I was liking? Well, I took a job at a university, and it was teaching and research in a balanced position. And I really enjoyed it. It's been a great opportunity, and I'm in my 34th year of doing that in this context. Although, I think it's important to note, I could have been happy probably in any of the other paths that I had worked in prior to this. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of career path, in terms of decades, there was for graduate school followed by postdoc staff fellow. I was affiliated with UNC and then NIEHS, and then I came back to Miami, where, in the 80s, I started my career. I was promoted and tenured in the 90s. And then I started having these connections to other departments, which were also a source of kind of richness. And it satisfied I just like working on different stuff and learning about different areas. And that allowed me to become affiliated and connected to biology in the 90s and after the turn of the century with sociology and gerontology and the Institute for the Environment Sustainability, and then more recently with media journalism and film. And my career has allowed me to both, while being at the same place, have different types of work and different types of responsibility. And that's been something that was very attractive to me. I guess the tip and advice, a word from your sponsor is to think about, be open to a career where your career might go in directions you never planned. I didn't plan when going to graduate school that I would end up in academia. I actually didn't have any sense that even government research was an opportunity, but both were opened up to me when I was in grad school, and my encounters with both were rich. In terms of research and scholarship, early on, my research was defined, within my dissertation and then the extensions to it. And so risk estimation and preclinical statistics. And this was kind of from my graduate study through postdoc and then early career, I was looking at these kinds of problems, and I was blessed with finding collaborators and partners. And a tip of the hat to many of these folks, which included Chris Portier and Walt Pigorsh. And these colleagues and friends, I could have decades of collaboration with them. And that's another thing that's been a really important part of my work and my career, are these connections that have continued and even for many to this day. I then, is starting at Miami, one of the ways I could connect to the local community of particular researchers that were applying this in public health contexts was to the folks at CDC NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And I ended up with connections and collaborators there. At Miami, I finally was connected to some folks that were interested in environmental toxicology. And my collaborator there was an environmental toxicologist, the main one in red there, Jim Morris. And he and I have, ultimately had decades where we worked together. I joke that, papers with Jim are older than, than three of my kids, so this kind of long-term investment and engagement was useful. But then I was able to test and sample, if you will, think of it as like a buffet with a sampling platter of lots of different problems, ranging from sports to gerontology to journalism. My current work, in particular, Donna mentioned the collaboration I have with journalism colleagues, which is the podcast Stats and Stories, which started in 2013. And it's also led to a book that we're finishing up for the ASA Practical Significance series called Statistics Behind the Headlines, but also statistical programming and other things. So I've had an opportunity to explore. I think it's consistent with some of the advice that Linda gave in terms of working hard and having fun. And whether that makes an impact is for others to judge. But it's been a great source of joy. The tips and advice, or the pausing from the word from our sponsors, while early on, if you're involved in a research career, which not everyone will be, it'll often be shaped by kind of what you were exposed to in your graduate studies. But tools, techniques, ideas will emerge that you can't even anticipate. Blogs and podcasts never existed when I was coming out of grad school, but yet there are things that I've really come to embrace and enjoy. And I would just say, be open, keep open to this. I've found collaboration to be a tremendous source of joy for me. And I would suggest that one of the things you do is keep open to partnerships. My last piece of advice is something that I picked up quite early, and it's always have things in the pipeline, and particularly if you're going to be evaluated and judged from it. So things that are getting to the point of publication, others that are getting that have been submitted, things that are closer to publication, and new ideas that you're exploring and might be growing into something that you can get published and do more with. The career path, and now this is the idea of engaging with the profession. It was interesting that Linda touched on this as well. So when I was an undergraduate, a professor told me, hey, you should join the American Statistical Association. That's your community. And I would, this is something I really embrace, and I would encourage all of you, if you're part of this ASA, CCD thing, you probably are already connected, but it's been great and you should do this. I was very interested in biostat related work, and that led me to connect with with ENAR, the Eastern North American region of the Biometric Society. In terms of applications, risk assessment and environmental talks were part of my scope of practice, and that led me to engage with other professional societies, including the Society for Risk Analysis and the similar Society for Environmental Toxin Chemistry, or an analogous one. I then, in part, became connected with from other colleagues' influence with things like the International Statistical Institute and AAAS, which have been just great joys as well. And as Donna mentioned, I just completed a term on the executive committee of ISI. So my career path with ISI has been, with ASA, I started out locally with chapters, then evolved into working with sections, then had an opportunity to serve on the board of directors in the early 2010s. ENAR was something I did in the 2000s. Initially was exposed to ISI in the late 2000s, and then within the 2010s, I spent a lot of time on the executive committee and did a lot of work within it. And those have been rich experiences as well. So my tip and advice is get involved in professional societies. I do like this sense of this broader connection with our discipline and sort of these lifelong friends that you'll see. And I think that I probably met Linda Young back in the 90s, and that was probably at an ENAR thing. And these types of engagements, it brings joy when you're going to these meetings in the future as you run in and connect to folks. You can do this kind of contribution, these types of connections at local, regional, national, and international levels. And I just encourage you to do it. The other thing I'll say is take the risk of running for office and maybe losing. I mean, if you're tapped to do this, try it. I mean, the worst thing is you could do it again, but it gives you a chance to even also evolve into leadership roles that you might not anticipate. I'm going to suggest that life balance is critical. This family is going to be forever. Your careers will end. So I was a soccer coach, and the picture that you see here, I include this because all of those little heads that are looking at me are now 31 plus years old. It was a great choice for me to do this. I really had great pleasure with working and doing this type of work. It's also kind of teaching where you could see the results of your work immediately manifest in the next weekend. Volunteer for school activities, do things. If this is part of your life and scope, find that way of having this balance in life. So I would suggest that life outside of career is more important than life within. And this strong connection outside of work provides this foundation for the success in your career. Closing thoughts. Your career is going to evolve, and you may not appreciate all those points of decision that will occur. There isn't a single best career path. I think I could have been happy in lots of different directions. I've been blessed to have the one that I did, but there are others that I think would have been equally good. I've enjoyed collaboration. I've been just excited about these unexpected and unusual opportunities. Again, think podcast. The connection to the professional society has made my practice of work in statistics and data science much richer as a consequence. And lastly, make sure that you continue to invest in your life outside of career, that these family, social, physical, spiritual components will serve you well. And that's it. I'll close up. I even have the shout out to the Twitter handles that would get you to me or to Stats and Stories if you're interested. So thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, John. Of course, I just need to say that you were 10 in that soccer picture, right? So, you just started young with that. No, really appreciate it. Well, our final presenter on this distinguished career journey is Dr. Abby Ekengaki. Abby is the Vice President of Statistical Consulting with Premier Research, a leading clinical research organization in the biotechnology space. He has over 26 years of experience as a biostatistician and has worked in different capacities around the globe in industry, academia, and with international organization systems. He has held senior technical and senior leadership positions in large pharma and at CROs. He has previously worked as a research scientist with the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. Prior to joining Premier Research, he spent 10 years at Eli Lilly before becoming head of North America biostatistics at Quintiles, the head of global statistical sciences for immunology at UCB Biopharma. He is a founder and past chair of the Biopharm Leadership and Practice Committee, and he is passionate about promoting statistical leadership. So we are so pleased to be able to welcome him to the webinar today.
Well, thank you so much, Donna. Let me just share this. So thanks, Donna, and Linda, John, thanks for that. That's very good experiences and great advice to students here. So from my end, I've been a statistician for about 28 years now. When I sit down and think about that, certainly the youngest of the three speakers here today. But those 28 years really have been full of wonderful experiences and obviously a long list of challenges as well. But that is what has made it really work. So I'm going to go through just from a few bullet points here through my background and provide some advice and tips as I see it. So essentially, I mean, the 28 years started off with my first 6 years in international organizations and academia. I had a short stint with the World Health Organization, which was really a follow-on from my PhD work. And that was really just a great opportunity and a lucky opportunity in a sense, because it happened when I was at Edinburgh at the DIA conference, presenting a paper on my PhD, and in the coffee room, was talking to some WHO folks there, and asked me to, write to them and for a job over in Switzerland. I had been linked to WHO because part of my PhD was based on, in part through their funding as well. But that was just a wonderful opportunity. So I never intended to, but I jumped to the opportunity immediately. But after that stint, I moved over to Australia, where I took on an academic position. That is something I've always enjoyed doing. I've always enjoyed teaching. And what I found while I was in academia is that not only was my passion in teaching, but more so, unlike some of my other colleagues, I realized then that my passion was not in technical, developmental, methodological research. It was really in engaging in consulting. So as an academic at the university, we used to have government agencies come to our department to work with some of the lecturers and professors in the department to consult with them. So I did quite a bit of consulting with the Australian government. I remember one of the interesting consulting opportunities I had as an academic was actually with a court case as an expert witness in a court case where I had to do some analysis and significant analysis and help my client win the case. And that was very interesting. It took me to a new dimension. Anyway, after those 6 years in academia, I realized that my passion for working in applied statistics, albeit with government, with different consulting, it made me want to go into the industry. So I then moved into the pharmaceutical industry from that, where I have been now since for the past 22 years. And clearly the pharmaceutical industry for me has really exposed me to a range of wonderful opportunities, a large number of successes within those 22 years, a number of big challenges that have also helped me develop and strengthen as well throughout the time in those 22 years, where I gradually moved from a senior technical role into senior leadership roles. The wonderful thing I found about the experience in the past 22 years in the industry is really the cross-pollination, working not just with statisticians, but working with a broad range of scientists and professionals and business folks, etc., and seeing the impact that a statistician can bring, not just through our methodological prowess, but in the way that we can distill information and transform that information into something that can help within a business make some critical decisions. So during those 22 years, my passion for leadership has just grown and grown and grown. And the focus of that passion has really been, how to continue to project and propel the statistician's ability to impact scientific and strategic decision. And I've done that in many ways through, as John pointed out here, through involvement in some of our major communities, the ASA, the biopharmaceutical section in Australia, the Statistical Society of Australia as well. And I see the great value in that. But it was also that passion for leadership. In fact, this happened while I was in Australia, that led me to doing a number of things which I have considered as perhaps my one or two career highlights. When Elizabeth asked me to think about my career highlights, I was thinking, well, over a 28-year career, I can come up with a number of very successful projects I've had where I've impacted clients or something like that. But what really is a highlight for me? What do I see as a highlight? And in my view, for me, what a highlight would be is something where I believe I made some major contributions that could have a long-lasting effect, and in fact has had a long-lasting impact. And it's in that realm where I decided to say, my two key highlights are, I think one of them is being the principal co-founder of the Australian Pharmaceutical Biostatistics Group, or APBG. Many of you don't know what that is, but in a nutshell, APBG is a non-profit association of pharmaceutical industry statisticians in Australia. It's akin to the biopharmaceutical section of the ASA here in the US, where the APBG's mandate is really to ensure high standards of statistical applications and to assist medicine in Australia in many ways in an advisory capacity or in decision-making on clinical trials and health economics. Now, when I was in Australia, as I was heading up the stats department over at Eli Lilly at the time, and the one thing that constantly was nagging me was the fact that in Australia, you have all these pharma companies and you have the stats groups in these pharma companies, albeit small stats groups, were starting to grow. But within the community itself, apart from the Statistical Society of Australia, we had no presence as a pharmaceutical statistics group. And that bothered me. And I felt that it was important that we build that. So I had this dream and I went over to my boss, Kathy Vanderbilt at the time, and I said, Kathy, I want to create something. I want us to form an established body in Australia that is really focused on pharmaceutical statisticians. And she says, well, how are you going to do that? And I said, well, what I need from you is some resources. I need you to give me some time, and I need you to give me some money so I can, pay some for some hotel meeting rooms where I can bring everybody in for some discussions. And she said, go ahead. So I did. I reached out to all my colleagues who are heads of statistics at Roche, at Pharma, at Pfizer, and Covance, and all the others. Organized a whole bunch of meetings. The first meeting was in a hotel, a nice large hotel. So they all flew from into Sydney. And it was a meeting for me to make the case. And I made the case as to why it's important that we as a pharmaceutical statistics group create a formal group, which is an Australian group, which will last in perpetuity. That was not a hard case to make, fortunately, because they all saw that. So from that, got a small group of them, and we worked together very tightly to start putting all the legwork together to formulate the charter for what this group would be, what we will do as a society, to get on board the Medicines Australia. Medicines Australia is really a government institution that represents the research-based pharmaceutical drug development in Australia, and under which all pharma companies and so are members. So we had to get their endorsement, and I specifically reached out to Medicines Australia. I personally held meetings with them to make the case to them, and eventually they approved. So, after months and months of negotiations and discussions and putting all this together, we were successful in having APBG endorsed by Medicines Australia and active. And I became the first chair of APBG shortly after I left Australia and came over to the US. So to me, that to me was something that has continues to impact statisticians in Australia today. And myself and my other co-founders, that was an effort that I think we will all look back on and say, well, if I go today, there is something there that is helping other statisticians develop. In the same sort of fashion, less complex, obviously, I'm also proud about having put together the ASA Biopharmaceutical Section Leadership and Practice Committee, which again was an idea. And I have to say that the chair of the Biopharm section at the time was also a visionary who could also see the value of this. And Bruce just said, well, I like the idea, why don't you put it into a proposal? Which I did, and we've established that. And today, it's our hope that LibCom will continue now to impact statisticians within the ASA, within the biopharmaceutical section, and really gear them towards appreciating the value of statistical leadership. That's the mandate there. So for me, those would be what I will consider my career highlights. Those two areas where I feel that my contribution has created an impact that hopefully will last well beyond just me. Now, some key considerations as I look along my career, a number of things I had to think about. I mean, my career has gone from academia to industry, and just making that move from academia to industry, again, I had to make some considerations there, because I did enjoy teaching. I did enjoy the other aspects of engaging with consulting as an academic. But I had to seriously think about, well, what is industry? I don't know what industry is. Should I go into consulting or should I go into industry? So those discussions I needed to have with myself and also with a few friends and who were experienced in industry as well. But that was a consideration I had to make, and which I think has turned out very well for me. In industry, and I think this is something that most statisticians face, if not all statisticians face, particularly in industry, is what role do you play? What do you do as a statistician? How do you evolve? And I had to think through that. You can evolve successfully as a technical statistician. Did I want to go into organizational leadership? And organizational leadership comes at multiple levels. So you can be live in the sort of hybrid space between technical and leadership. But once you start getting higher up, it becomes more and more leadership and less technical. So at what range do I want to get in there? And how do I just evolve through that? So all those are the sort of thinkings that's the sort of thinking that drove a lot of my actions, a lot of what I did, and drove a lot of what I wanted to do, or how I wanted to develop myself. And because my focus and my passion was really on having that leadership impact, whatever that meant at the time, as a senior technical statistician, that leadership impact, I was thinking of it more in terms of technical prowess. But as that evolved, and why did it evolve? Because I was really pushing on within the organizations that I worked in, how do I develop my leadership? And what can the organization do to help me develop my leadership? And that was not just a question that I was asking, but it was really more a push that I was making with my bosses at the time, etc. I started reading heavily on things like leadership skills, leadership development books that apply to all professions, and was realizing more and more that within the pharma industry, there are great opportunities for you to actually exercise that leadership while doing your work as a statistician, because of the cross-functional nature of the work within that industry on a day-to-day basis. You see in real time the sort of influence that you, the statistician, and the statistical thinking you bring to the table can have. But at the same time, and this is the danger, you also see the real examples of where a statistician, despite their technical strengths, can really stuff up the whole decision-making processes if they don't quite have the fine-tuning in how to talk to the business folks who are not technical and who have their own sort of business goals, if you like. They want the statistician to give them the numbers, to give them the recommendations, but they will take that as a recommendation because they have a number of other things that they're considering in terms of the ultimate decision. Our job as a statistician is to understand what that broader goal is and see how we can navigate thinking towards that while showing the value that that statistics brings, showing the value that the data brings, and showing how the data can lead them to that decision. That's a skill. That's what I call an influencing skill. This is something we don't learn as statisticians when we do our masters and PhDs. It is something we have to learn in the field. And it's not something that the statisticians should be made to learn on their own. The organization, the institution in which you work should help in developing that. But we should also be proactive at looking for avenues in which we can develop those skills. And that is what leadership to me is about. And it's something which I feel is a key consideration for statisticians, particularly in the industry, as you are grooming your career. So looking at the sort of personal aspects that affected my path, as you can see already from what I've said so far, I've really worked around the world, and moving from one place to another is always a big consideration there, and seeing how I'm going to adjust in the new setting. What do I need to do to adjust in the new setting from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because John alluded to the need for work-life balance, and that is so critical. And sometimes for those of you who've moved from one country to another, you realize sometimes that can sort of perturb your work-life balance initially, and it can affect your professional performance. It could even affect your personal life in many ways. So I found that in moving, one of the big things that was very helpful for me is really inserting myself in the new area that I have moved into. And inserting myself, what do I mean? It's not just with work, but inserting myself with the people that I meet, with the teams that in my new job or the new environment. Find out more about them, find out more about the organization in this setting, find out more about the culture of the area you've moved into, because I found that is, I had some good examples where I didn't quite understand that initially, and I probably made some faux pas, but it's a very important thing to find out and to understand, particularly when you're moving from one place to another. And within that context, one of my, in terms of lessons learned, I think as I look back, I think one of the most impactful lessons I have had in my career was very much in that vein of moving from one country to another, taking on a role and then launching myself into it without first understanding the sort of culture, the thinking around, etc. And just to give you a snippet of the example, this was years ago when I moved when I was with Eli Lilly, and I moved from Australia to the US, to Indianapolis, and that was a fantastic opportunity. Albeit moving from Sydney to Indianapolis is a bit of a culture shock for me, but it was a great opportunity nonetheless. And I was charged with coming over and establishing, taking over and building up what they called the Center for Statistical Analysis, which is almost a small little CRO within the company in itself. And I remember when I first got there, and I was asked to present my ideas about how I'll set this up, and I was asked to do that 2 days before the meeting in which I was supposed to present the ideas. I was thinking, okay, how am I going to communicate this? I already had some ideas in my head based on what I had done in Australia. So in those 2 days, I just quickly put together some high-level slides, and I just came into a meeting and said, okay, look, guys, this is what I'm thinking. We'll set it up like this, and here's some structures, and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Everyone was quiet. And this was a presentation to my colleagues on the management team within Lilly at the time, so the stats management team. And I remember vividly, there was quiet initially, and then clearly they all had completely different ideas. So that didn't go too well. But then the lesson I got from that was this. I had recently moved over. I didn't quite yet understand the culture. I didn't quite yet understand the fact that they had talked about this as a team multiple times, and they weren't all on the same page, even though the head of the team was pushing that, but they weren't all on the same page. So what I had not done when I just came in was find out with each of them, where they stood on this. So what are the yays, what are the no's, what are the concerns? How can we work through it? All right. So this is a big lesson for me. And what I learned from that is that what I was essentially trying to do is I was essentially trying to build something new without having had consensus. And it taught me the value when you are leading a major change initiative that's going to impact the way people work. It taught me the value of this sort of piecemeal consensus building, and that value, I think, it transcends across the board in many other settings. So that was a very, very good lesson there. So in terms of tips and advice, John and Linda have given some very good advice already, which I completely agree with. The one thing that I would add to that, and again, this to me lies very much within the context of how you navigate your career development, is the consideration that as a statistician, we should not think of our careers simply as developing very strong technical prowess. That in itself, on its own, is completely insufficient to be an impactful statistician. You need to balance those technical skills, people skills, process management skills, etc. All right, and one way to think of your career as you evolve, which incorporates all these, is to break your career path into sort of 3 chronological stages. And I will consider these stages as the first one being really building your foundation. And by building your foundation, and this can start it can start at any time, when you're a brand new statistician or a young statistician, or you can start when you're an experienced statistician who's going to a new job, for instance. Okay, but the building your foundation part as a statistician, this is where you really do need to build your technical skills, show superior performance, make sure that you take note of your accomplishments. Do not take lightly the accomplishments, because and it's not for the sake of patting yourself on the back, it's also for the sake of of building and knowing how you can improve. Then differentiating yourself is the second stage of your career. Once you've built that foundation, then you want to see how you can differentiate yourself, what sort of things you can do differently. And that differentiating yourself from a leadership perspective in particular, this is where you start looking at how do you engage if you're working in cross-functional teams, how do you improve that ability to engage with them? What sort of impact can you make? To what extent is what you're doing empowering others? This is what differentiates you among the group of statisticians who have already set up their foundation. And then that third stage is really developing your leadership, both in yourself and in others as well. But this is where, while there is so much you can do, there is also a lot the organization can do and should do. And you have to have the awareness of how to leverage that from the organization, who to talk to push certain things. So that awareness, that individual awareness is important there. But really, I would think of taking your career path and breaking it up into these sort of three buckets. They are overlapping, and intentionally think through it. Talk to your managers, get some mentors, talk to them about it, and I think that's the way to help in developing your.
Abby, thank you very much. I'm just really sensitive to the time, and we're just about 3 minutes over. So
this is like my last slide. So this is
that wonderful. Thank you so much. I just thought I would invite Linda and John to come back in briefly, and maybe Linda, I'll start with you, and we'll just sort of go around and ask you to give your best piece of advice, right? What do you wish that you knew 20 years ago that you know now? And we'll end with that question from each of you.
You're muted.
You're muted, Linda.
I'd probably say don't stress so much about the small things and care so much about what people think about you. Just to try to treat each person well and to do a good job, and things will work out in the long run.
That's wonderful advice. John, add to that.
I like that. Not taking yourself too seriously in the process. I would, if you're in a job or in a role that you don't like, leave it. Statistics and data science is an open community, an open world of opportunities. And if you're not finding joy in your work, then pursue another. And I'd probably also give my past self some advice on stocks. Probably some investment advice would be that may be the most important thing. If I did that, then they wouldn't be worried about the job thing.
Great. And Abby?
I think of a woman called Jo Miller. She's a prominent leader in women's leadership. And she made a quote which says something to the effect of, don't think outside the box. Think like there is no box. And I think that is really poignant to statisticians. Do not limit yourself by thinking, well, I have to think within the confines of my organization or this or that. Think like there is no box and excel.
Wow, that is just absolutely wonderful advice. And so I'll invite my colleague Elizabeth back and thank everyone thank, of course, our distinguished panelists, the Committee on Career Development for pulling us together for this wonderful hour. And Elizabeth, I'll ask if you have any closing thoughts.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna. I just want to say thank you again to our speakers. This was a really great overview of some really successful careers with great tips along the way. Really appreciated the personal aspects that everyone was able to offer. That was just fantastic. And so I will point people on the webinar to the CCD website. We have all kinds of information about our upcoming events. Someone had asked a question about JSM. As Donna noted, the registration for that will open a little closer to the event as we figure out all of the logistics for that. In the meantime, we will probably have a couple of webinars, podcasts, keep eyes open for that. And be sure to join our friends of the CCB email list if you would like to get notifications. We try not to spam people too much, but we want to let you know what's going on. So check out our website for all of that. And of course, please feel free to email myself or Christina Nurse, our co-chair. Thank you again to the speakers. Thank you to Donna for hosting. And thank you to everyone for joining us.
Yeah, so John, if you will allow me, I'll close by saying thank you to all of you for sharing your stats and stories with us.
New episodes every week, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can even hear Linda Young as a past guest on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Donna and Elizabeth and John, Linda. Thank you.
Nice to meet
Thanks.
you, Abby.
Thanks
Thanks everyone
to
for coming, and
everyone.
thanks for the
Everyone.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.